In 2019, I started a discipleship journey with Pastor Douglas called The Six. And one of the activities that he had us go through was particularly profound for me. He had us read the Bible story about Jesus and the disciples when they got into the boat and went out onto the water and the storm came up. And he challenged us to really put ourselves into that Bible scene and think about what are the things we would see, what are the sounds that we would hear, what are the things that we would feel if we were actually there. And the last question he asked us was to think about who we would be. What kind of character would we be? Would we be a disciple or maybe one of the bystanders if we were actually there? What did we picture ourselves as? And I remember clearly thinking, I pictured myself as a disciple, but maybe not in a good way. I pictured myself as one of the disciples that were panicking and frantically hauling the water out of the boat in a desperate attempt to save us. And this was a real insightful activity for me because I realized that I tend to be really independent. I tend to get really busy getting things done, solving problems, that I actually forget that Jesus, my Savior, is right there in the boat beside me, waiting to help me out amidst the storm. I tend to rely on myself, and maybe I don't even really know how to fully rely on Him and surrender to Him. And so I had a storm that came up in my life over this past year. It started about October, November, when I realized significant amount of hair falling out of my head. And it continued and continued, and I got really worried and eventually saw my family doctor in December, and she said that it was alopecia, which is an autoimmune disease. And so I accepted that and I prayed and hoped that it would go away, but it didn't. Hair continued to fall out of my head at an alarming rate, a shocking rate, to be honest. And it was really challenging to deal with. I was worried. I was worried that something more was wrong. I felt like something more was wrong. And I remember it took a real toll on my mental health because hair was everywhere. My showers turned out to be dreaded experiences because I spent most of my time trying to collect my hair so that it wouldn't clog the drain. And I was tired of picking hair off of my clothes and off of my pillow and cleaning up my hair everywhere in the house. It was like a dripping tap, where hair was constantly everywhere. And in January, I saw a dermatologist, and by that time, prior I got to the point where I had kind of a couple of bald spots with no hair at all. But then that escalated, and by January I had complete sections of my head that were quite bald and maybe just terrible scraggles of hair left over. And the dermatologist said that in most cases, in regular cases, people just have those small spots with no hair. And 80% of the time, the hair grows back in about 18 months. But he said, your case is severe, so I honestly don't know what will happen. You might never get your hair back, or it might grow back, but just to fall out again. He says, I don't know. And so I spent a lot of time in prayer, but eventually my prayers changed. Originally, I was asking God to please make this stop. Please help my hair to grow back so I could feel normal again. But eventually my prayers changed, where I just asked God to please give me strength to endure. Please help me to accept my situation and to fully surrender it to Him. And I think God for sure answered my prayers, and He used my husband and my family in a special way to wrap His arms around me and to comfort me. And I was so thankful for that. Eventually, probably about 70% of my hair fell out, and it was at that time that I asked my husband to shave my head. I was tired of that dripping tap of hair falling out everywhere. And so he agreed. He shaved my head for me. And I think at that time is when I fully accepted the situation, and I believe I fully gave it to God. And the storm in my life certainly isn't over yet, but I was just reminded this past week that God uses events and circumstances to shape us. And God for sure did not give me alopecia, but according to Romans 8:28, He can use even this circumstance for good. And so I look for ways that God is working in my life and other people's lives. Maybe He can use me in this circumstance to help somebody else. And during those times when I find I'm really struggling with my new reality, I pray and I ask God to help me surrender and resurrender. And I remind myself that Jesus is in that boat beside me. And it's at those times that I am thankful to God, because He gives me the strength to endure, to keep pushing forward, and He gives me this unshakable peace that I know can only come from Him.